Hopefully we've got people at home ready to go. How we doing? Lunch okay? Now, do you have the ability to leave to go to lunch? If you have a pass. Anyone special have a special pass? No? Okay. How was the lunchroom then?
Busy.
It was what?
Busy.
Busy? Okay.
It takes all the fun in the spot if you don't get there right away.
Oh boy. All right. Please, well, hopefully no one was sitting on the floor. Hope not. So that would be awkward. But all right, so lunch was busy. Hours 1 and 2 went okay. All right. First hour you talked about your song that got you through this difficult time. Did you? Oh man, some did, some didn't. Oh. All right, those who did, what was your song? I'm just curious. What do you got?
I didn't do it, but if you haven't listened to it, listen to the Wellerman.
The what?
The Wellerman. It's a sea shanty of sorts.
Okay. Willer Man. I'm curious now. All right. Anyone else? Okay. Where's my manners? Some of you are new to me. I'm Mr. Newcomb. All right. You call me Mr. Newcomb. Some I might have had in soccer, so they might call me Coach Newcomb. So some people might just randomly walk into my room and just say, Nuke, got this question for you. So sometimes they refer to me Nuke, all that stuff. So there we go. Now you know who I am. Song, like I told my first hour, I had a bunch of seniors, we went through all that stuff. We talked about song. We talked about, food, what kind of food got you through this difficult time. We talked about movies and to get you through the difficult time. So we would expand it. I said, for me, any song related to the Red Hot Chili Peppers, I'm gonna listen to it. I gotta get to that higher ground, the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Of course, for food, I arrived at, and this probably tells me like I'm an old person and all that stuff. Give me some good Ritz. Good Ritz. And of course, I had a quiz my first hour to see if they know what I possibly would be drinking with my Ritz. All right. And if anyone knows who I am and what I might drink with my Ritz or with anything, they're like, Diet Coke, Mr. Newcomb. So, yeah, Ritz and Diet Coke. So sure enough, that's what I'd be doing. And if there was a movie or a series out there, all that stuff, that's a tough one because, I'm, as Miss Iden knows, I'll just channel search and I'll watch just about anything because I get sucked into really bad movies. But, I guess, this past year, maybe like The Mandalorian, WandaVision, that type of thing would be like my go-tos and stuff like that. And then sometimes, if I want to communicate with Mr. Sheridan, I'll watch a little Premier Soccer, and just play around with his emotions by texting him about his favorite club and how bad they are, stuff like that. So there we go. All right. So today we are starting 3.1. Seems like a long journey to get to 3.1. All right. Some of my first hours said spring break felt like a long journey to get to 3.1, and he was referencing the spring break from 2020 to now. He was a VLA student, so now he transitioned back into the classroom. So he felt his exit was a long time. But 3.1, and we do have a wellness activity. We'll get to that in a moment. For those who are new to me, it would be nice if you could fill out that getting to know form. If I've had you the past 2 trimesters, there's no need to. I have that information. But, if something changes, feel free. And then I'll give you some highlights of what we're going to do for 3.1. And we're going to jump into our first activity, which happens to also be our first summative. So it's important that you dial in there as well. So in terms of our wellness activity, we'll get through it. The ICC. We know the ICC, right? How many times have you heard the ICC? Would you say? From the moment you started, as can't say little freshman because you're all bigger than me. But as a freshman to now, how many times have you heard ICC? A lot. It's probably hard to quantify. Do you sometimes feel like it's subconsciously you know what it is? Because it's been said so many times. Come on, man, you got to follow the ICC. Got to show a little integrity. Got all that stuff. So ICC, individual character counts. You might have even heard about it before you even came to Park High. It could have been that. Maybe because you're involved in activities of some sort that requires it. All right, so ICC, why ICC? You know, it's going to create a welcoming and safe environment. That's our goal. And it's one that we are constantly striving. All right. We always can work on the welcoming. We can always work on the safe environment. Always work on it. But it's one that we're striving towards. Okay. I'm going to give you the judgment call here because I can show it. Would you like to watch the video clip? I see some heads going this way. Some like, I don't know. Okay, but ICC. We've already seen the video clip. It was one that was given at the beginning of the school year. I'm going to make the judgment call. And if you're upset, I'm sorry. We can talk about it. But integrity, all right? What does integrity mean? All right, if we've seen it and we've been infused with it since 9th grade, what is integrity? Anyone here or at home? What's integrity? What do you got, Zach?
Doing the right thing even when no one's looking.
Do the right thing. All right, that's hard. Do the right thing. Anyone else? Go ahead.
Stay true to yourself.
Stay true to yourself. Stay true to yourself. It's about integrity. So you're not going to change because, you know, situation, integrity. Okay. So some things are like that, you know, that can go with it, being honest, good character, being an upstander. So building on what you two had said about integrity, definitely. Commitment. What could be another way of saying commitment? Zach's going to be the go-to guy today.
Perseverance.
For now. Perseverance. Woo. Perseverance. Anyone else? Go ahead, Annie. Stay with it. Stay with it. Okay. Stay with it. All right. So we're talking about dedication, staying with it. Responsibility is about commitment, being and your involvement. So at Park High, there's a number of ways to be involved. Responsibility is about commitment, knowing that if you're going to say you're going to do it, you commit to it. You need to do it. And own it. Own it when you make it. Own it when you don't make it. All right. And then compassion. All right. Other ways of saying compassion. You're gonna be using up all your go-tos. Pretty soon I'm gonna say, sorry, Zach. But it's okay. Go ahead, Zach.
Kindness.
Kindness. All right. Kindness. Kindness. All right. We get almost want to throw some commentary out there, but I won't. So understanding, acceptance, caring, kindness, all that plays a part there. These are our ICC values, definitely. So they're all our values. You know what? You're going to find out, I think, you know, down the road, you're going to probably reference these at some point. Whether you consciously or subconsciously, you're going to reference them because they have been ingrained so much in you that it's become part of it. It's almost like you've been programmed, like the ICC chip has been put in there. You know, and I say that because from my days at the University of Minnesota, I had belonged to a fraternity, and we had something similar to ICC. We had what were known as the 3 cardinal principles of what we try to live our life by each day: virtue, diligence, and since it's a fraternity, the idea of brotherly love. And so virtue, diligence, and brotherly love. And I find myself, and with ICC, I integrate ICC in there, and I use it. I simply use it. And when I do get together with at times with some of my old college buddies, you know, we do reference our cardinal principles. It's just the way it is. Or when I have a discussion with my kids and they're asking, oh, why you got to be the most and all this stuff. I'm sorry. I'm just living up to my cardinal principles here. And I should have, I don't have it with me, but I have a card that from my days in the fraternity, and on the back side of it, it has my cardinal principles. It's with me all the time. These ICC values, they're going to be with you the entire time. So these are going to shape you, consciously or subconsciously. They are going to shape you. Past reminders. All right. So if you do need a restroom, just ask for a pass. I'll hook you up with one. I don't have them laying around, but just come up, ask, and I'll hook you up with a pass. Electronic passes, they'll be pushed out to you. I will, if I periodically check this, I can see if someone here has a pass. But that's another way that I can find out if someone like a counselor or someone in the wellness center, or you have a pass to leave. I can see that, or I can see it at Infinite Campus as well. So past reminders, all that stuff. There we go. All right. So let me just shut this off. You don't have to panic. These are not lecture notes. I'm not going to give you lecture notes because I don't give it often and stuff like that. So try 3.1 is going to focus on our third big topic. At the beginning of the school year, Ms. Ida and I, we had said that there were going to be 3 topics that we really are going to focus on: U.S. Civil War, Great Depression, and the Civil Rights Movement. And so we are on the third one. We were also going to do the internal assessment, but you know, we kicked that can down the road, all right? Which means year 2, we will take care of the internal assessment. So last try 2.1 or 2.2, that's why we had done the Second World War, to make that space. This try, we are going to focus on the Civil Rights Movement as well as social movements of the Americas. So we're going to spend a good chunk on the Civil Rights Movement in regards to African Americans, but then we're also going to look at social movements in regards to other groups: Indigenous people, women, Latinx, Asian Americans will be in there as well, and youth, the youth movement. So we'll focus on a variety in the youth movement. Does include the counterculture. So if you're into the hippies, all right, we'll get to the counterculture piece. And at that point, I will have to clarify, even though because I was born in the 60s does not make me a hippie by any means. We are going to start off this big unit, civil rights and social movements, with looking at Indigenous peoples first. Then we will move on and look at women and Latinx. And I think I misspoke when I said Asian Americans. We'll try to integrate that in there. And then we'll have the civil rights movement in regards to African Americans. And then we'll conclude it with the youth and the counterculture piece. So we're going to start off with the Indigenous people. In my day, we'd simply would have referred to them as American Indians, but times and titles and all that stuff changes over time, and so Indigenous people. And Indigenous people will have a special place with me because I do have some Indigenous roots. So this is where I get to talk about my indigenous. I just have goosebumps thinking about it and all that. So for the next 4 days, we're going to focus on indigenous peoples. Okay. And when I say that, it's going to be indigenous peoples of the Americas. So it's not only the U.S. It can be just the U.S. depending on that you focus on U.S. It can also be Canada as well as Latin America. Because as you see, the indigenous population, a good chunk of the indigenous population is going to be found in Latin America. And that could be because of a variety of reasons, as we'll find out. But pre-1492, all right? What's so special about 1492? Let's talk about that. What's so special about 1492? Yep, that's Columbus, right? And so prior to the Columbus expedition to the Western Hemisphere, we looked at estimated indigenous population is about 112 million. All right, fast forward to 2020, that number is going to be significantly less, you know. And so in Latin America, about 45 million. With that, Mexico, about 22% of the population is indigenous. Bolivia has the largest indigenous population. What we find in places like Bolivia and Peru, there is a lot of, we could say, mixing of the different ethnic and racial groups. Maybe a larger, what we call mestizos population. So Bolivia, even though it says 5.4 million, 48% of the population is considered indigenous. And at one point, they did have a president who was indigenous. Canada, 1.7 million, which is about 4.9% of their population. And here in the United States, about 4.5 million, which is about 1.5%. And in the great state of Minnesota, we're looking at about a population of about 58,000. So Minnesota does have a large indigenous population. Alaska will have a large indigenous population, but we have to go more to the Southwest to find perhaps a greater concentration. If we look at number of tribes, we got about 574 tribes that are federally recognized, and they are called sovereign nations. So they got sovereignty, which is an important word that will come into play. And that's recognized by the BIA, or the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And the new Interior Secretary, first time ever, is an indigenous person. In Minnesota, we have 11 tribes that are recognized. 11 tribes. And of that, 4 of them are Dakota. All right. Another name for Dakota can be Sioux. But now it comes from perspective. Dakota means friends. Sioux means snake eyes, which is considered an insult. And a Sioux, and the name was given to them by their enemies, and their historic enemy is the Ojibwa. But if we lived in Wisconsin, we'd call them Chippewa. But if we ask the Ojibwa, they might want to be called Anishinaabe, First Peoples. So, but you have 7 tribes that are Ojibwa. So when we look at Dakota, Lower Sioux, Upper Sioux, Prairie Island, and Shakopee, Mede-Wakata. All right. All that is in southern Minnesota primarily. Of course, Prairie Island and Shakopee is pretty close to us. And I could say we are standing on indigenous ground of the Dakota here in Cottage Grove. Ojibwa, we're looking at Red Lake. White Earth is the biggest, but we have Red Lake, White Earth, Boise Fort, which sometimes we refer to as Net Lake, Fond du Lac, which is up there near Duluth, Grand Portage is up there near the Canadian border. And then, of course, Mille Lacs Lake, which that's a pretty spread out band as well. And each band, each tribe has subsets to them as well. Okay, so that's just a little bit there of the indigenous peoples in the Americas and in our great state of Minnesota. There had been in Minnesota also groups known as like the Winnebago, which are the Ho-Chunk group. And sometimes we had Menominee in Minnesota as well. But change in Indian policy as well as dislike of each other group could explain why some exist in Minnesota and some don't. At one point, all of Minnesota was Dakota, but the Ojibwa is an eastern band that came in and settled in the northern part of Minnesota. All right. Any thoughts, questions with that? This area also was referred to another name, and it makes reference to, and sometimes on land plots, it references it as Red Rock. So you might have heard that name before, Red Rock. And most of us have probably been to the village of Kaposia, South St. Paul. So we've got a lot of names there. I'm not, sorry, getting off on a tangent here. Now, how does this in some ways tie into the civil rights movement? Because we really didn't focus on, we didn't get the context of the civil rights movement, but the civil rights movement is encompassing over, it's a big umbrella if we want to look at it. And we find in the civil rights movement, eventually groups splintering off from it. And the indigenous peoples would be it. In the 1960s, we start seeing that splinter. And so we want to focus on that. All right, I got a little video clip here. If anyone knows, I'm always good for a little video clip. So I'm going to do that. I've got a little video clip. That's going to give us a little overview of civil rights and Native Americans. And so we'll watch that. Then I've got a little bit more to talk about indigenous roots, and then we'll jump into our assignment. Any questions as we go through here? All right, let's do this.
The success of the civil rights movement in the 1960s encourages other minorities to assert themselves.
I grew up in Miami, and I was about, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old at the time. I was fascinated by this sign over the water fountain that said colored, and I thought that water of different colors was going to come out of the fountain. And when I went to that fountain and touched it, my babysitter came running over, said, "Don't touch that, that's dirty. That has germs on it. That's for colored people." That's roughly 1961, 1962. That's the beginning of the 1960s. By the end of the 1960s, which we historians end in 73 or 74, that's something that you wouldn't find.
More and more during the 1970s, groups of Americans start to discover themselves and to organize around specific kinds of group identity, to see themselves as a distinct minority with distinct grievances, rights, and needs, and to assert proudly that form of identity. And so you see the kind of echoes of Black power, of minority cultural nationalism across the United States.
Few minorities have deeper or more justifiable grievances than Native Americans.
American Indians did not achieve citizenship en masse until 1924 with the Indian Citizenship Act. So from the very founding to 1924. You have a group of people who are viewed as essentially aliens or wards, essentially. That was the terminology that the United States used.
Just as the war was ending, there was talk of terminating the formal treaty and executive order relationships of the United States with the various tribes so that there would be no government-to-government relationship.
For much of the post-war period, the federal government seems determined to force Native Americans into the mainstream of American life.
And the idea was to set them up with positions, jobs, so that they could become mainstream Americans and have economic opportunities. And it worked to the advantage of some Indian people, at least initially. But what often happened was the initial job broke down and people ended up going unemployed and living in ghettos. And it separated people from their families, from their languages, from their cultural events, ceremonies that took place on the reservation. So it was difficult for lots of families.
Mimicking the civil rights movement, a group of Native Americans occupies Alcatraz Island to bring attention to their plight.
I remember George Horsecapture saying that the landing on Alcatraz Island was like the landing of the Marines at Iwo Jima, that there was something that dramatically had changed.
But then comes the incident known as Wounded Knee. It begins with the murder of a Lakota man in Custer County, South Dakota.
The decision was made that the person who had murdered this young man was going to get off very lightly, and it wasn't even going to be considered a murder. So the AIM people moved into Custer County and began threatening the county officials for what they had done. Things became very heated, and the AIM people decided to retreat to the Pine Ridge Reservation, to a small place that was symbolic of Native American history, a place called Wounded Knee. Then they proclaimed themselves an independent Oglala Sioux nation in defiance of the United States. And the clash came at Wounded Knee. It ended in tragedy with some FBI people dying, but also a number of Native people dying.
You're muted.
Thank you. They seem to be overshadowed by the bigger civil rights umbrella here, and so then they start focusing on their own what we'll call identity politics, and each group will have their degree of success doing it that way. And so the American Indians or Native Americans will be doing the same thing. One of the big groups is going to be known as the American Indian Movement, AIM, which actually did found its roots in Minneapolis, on Franklin Avenue in Minneapolis. Now, in that clip, it did talk about how this idea of kind of terminating or sending indigenous people to the cities. And again, Minneapolis, the little heart community, Heart of Earth community would be an example of that. 1940s, 50s, and 60s, where that is being started as well. All right, now here I got a picture here, and that would be my grandmother is in that picture. My grandma is the little one here. At this point, she is a member of the Nabora, Nebraska Santee Reservation. And so this picture is probably about 1912, 1913. Every one of them, or the vast majority of them, had been sent to a boarding school. And so basically what that would mean is you're gonna have to get your hair cut, and you're gonna need to kind of reflect mainstream society. And you're gonna work on what they would say in the Indian boarding schools is kill the Indian, save the man. And so the idea is give them some skills, vocational training, some understanding of how mainstream society works and all that stuff at the Indian boarding school. So my grandmother spent a little bit of time, I'm not going to say a significant amount, but a little bit of her time. Her older siblings spent much more time at Indian boarding schools. So she was born in Paxton Township, Minnesota, which is down by the Lower Sioux Reservation. But she's not a member of the Lower Sioux Reservation. 1862, when we studied the Civil War, right? When we studied the Civil War in here, I did not reference it, but 1862 in Minnesota, the Dakota decided to have an uprising. And her grandfather, which would mean my great-great-grandpa, Peter Felix Jr., had a very difficult decision. He had enlisted in the U.S. Or he had enlisted in the Minnesota 6th Regiment. He thought he was going to go fight against Confederates. Before he could go fight against Confederates, he had to go fight against his own people. And as a result of that, he was considered kind of quotes friendly Dakota. And in 1863, as a result of that, all Dakota and Minnesota were kicked out. We might use the word exiled. And the friendly Dakota, so my great-great-grandpa, her grandfather, was sent to Nebraska. So on the Nabora, Nebraska reservation, that's where the friendly Indians were sent. So that's where the Felixes, all right, had been sent. And they were mixed. They would be considered mixed blood. They were sent there. It's not until about the 1870s, 1880s did they work their way back. So that's how we got back to Minnesota. At least my dad's family got back to Minnesota. And eventually she worked her way, they moved their way all the way up to a place called Bedote. Today we'll call it Mendota, but worked their way back to Bedote, which is a very important spot for Dakota, the bringing of two rivers together, the Mississippi and the Minnesota. Which probably the proper way of saying Minnesota, we all say Minnesota, Minnesota, Minnesota would be the proper way of saying it. So my grandmother, though, and this is where we talk about effects, historical effects, or if we want to talk about and use the word historical trauma in there. If I was going to sit down and have a conversation with my grandmother about our indigenous past, she would not want to have a conversation about it at all. And a lot of it has to do because of the Indian boarding school and just the experiences of growing up. I tried to have a conversation with my dad. My dad could patch it together because he would have more conversations with some of his cousins who were kids of my grandmother's brothers and sisters. But because of that historical trauma or the context of their upbringing, it was one in which you didn't learn a lot about, that you have to piece it together. So I have been spending a lot of time piecing it together to a point where I think I've got a pretty good picture. I'm not an enrolled member of the Nabora, Nebraska Santee Sioux. My grandmother never enrolled her kids, and that speaks to why she may not have viewed herself as an indigenous person anymore. But I do have the distinction of being a lineal descendant. The Bureau of Indian Affairs gives me that distinction. I'm a lineal descendant, which basically means I'm an indigenous person without a formal tribe that says I'm enrolled. So we got that piece there as well. So when we look at, I'm sharing all that, throwing all that stuff out there, that's part of who we are, or who I am. It's part of what influences me. And when we study this, I think of that a lot, about that past. I never really got to know Ellen. I never really got to know Alfred and Eugene or Edward. They had all passed away way before I was born, but Sophie and Peter and my mom, grandma Virginia, definitely knew. And I've got to know Ellen's kids though, because they eventually found their way out to Shakopee. And so there would be many weekends in which my dad would take me out to Shakopee and visit with Ellen's kids. And I got to know that side of the family a little bit better there as well. So, indigenous people, they may make up a small percentage of the US population, but it's going to be very hard not to find their influence though, and the remnants throughout, in this state, Minnesota, and throughout the United States. So with that long way of getting to what our task at hand here, nope, wrong group, wrong class. First day, I'll screw up. Let's go to Schoology and take a look at indigenous activity. All right, and if you open it up, it's gonna look something like this. And it is aggressive. I'll admit that one, it's aggressive. And so with the indigenous peoples here of the Americas, we're gonna find that indigenous people are gonna influence us in many ways. Economically, politically, and socially, they're gonna influence us. And the indigenous people have experienced change. I remember someone had asked me, hey, just summarize what you think would be indigenous policies in the United States. And I said, well, okay, I'll be quick. Removal, concentrate, assimilate, terminate, sovereignty. And we're here to the sovereignty piece here. So over time, it has changed. And the last bit about sovereignty is just about respecting, if you're going to call them nations, respecting them as nations. So we're going to get a sense here of these indigenous movements. With our constraints, though, we're not going to be able to focus on all three, so you get to pick which one you want to focus on. All right? And you may work with a historical buddy, or you can do this solo. Okay? And there are three indigenous movements here that we're looking at: Latin America, Latin American indigenous movement, Native American movement in the United States, and First Peoples movement in Canada. Sometimes it's referred to as First Peoples. Okay, so once you figure that out, then you have options. It depends on how hard you want to work on this. It's worth 20 beautiful points here, summative. And so for the A, you can do a graphic novel, a winter count, which I will take time to explain in a moment, and or a newscast. And you kind of see the expectations there. All right. Options for a B, you got your Google slide, PowerPoint, Adobe Spark page, that type of stuff. And then you have a timeline. All right, and so again, you want to make sure that you take a look at the descriptions that go along with it. Especially with the timeline, there are a number of events, but you want to find what you think is 10 events in signature or signature legislation pieces. Because ultimately, we want to look at, again, change over time, but start working towards some legislation or some events that have a profound impact. on indigenous people. All right. What you should include in here, well, here are your 3 overall big talking points. First one is the situation of indigenous people before 1945. You can't just say they lived on reservations, because not all of them did. Or you can't just say that they were removed. We need to get an understanding of what we look at here. This is the historical discriminations, inequalities, and that could be social, political, economic, right? Indigenous activism increases after 1945. We know World War II is the catalyst for the change. So here, this is where you focus on a person or a group of people. You know, for us in the United States, it would be like the American Indian movement, but there are other groups out there than just the American Indian movement. The American Indian movement could be viewed as some like to put in the radical social justice group. There might be some more moderate voices, right? Just like you'll find in other groups as well. Or there's a certain individual that stands out as well. Okay, and events. In the video, they talked about how in the United States, they took over like Alcatraz. You know, after the escape of Alcatraz happened, the federal government shut it down. It was abandoned. American Indians thought, hey, we're going to take it. So you had the occupation of Alcatraz, or you had the occupation of the Bureau of Indian Affairs building, or you had the occupation at Wounded Knee. There's a number of events here that could fit in. All right. And then you got government response to the increased activism here. Legislation or programs. How did they respond to it? How did our government or the Canadian government or some Latin American government respond to what the indigenous people are doing? Could be positive, could be negative. All right. So if you pick Latin American indigenous movement, I do have a handout. Again, if should have clicked on it. There we go. You see, we got some handouts, and Mr. Werner Thompson, Thomas Thompson, had put together a page of indigenous movements as well. You can click on that, and you can find some good stuff there, good resources. All right, but you do have some good resources here as well. All right, this is going to be due, before I say that, you have a BHQ. To how and to what extent did indigenous people in Canada, Latin America, or the United States achieve equality? So to what extent? So that's great. All right, 20 points due Tuesday, the 23rd, due Tuesday, the 23rd. All right, so that means today, tomorrow, Monday, Tuesday. All right, I almost broke out. On my other side of the family is German, so I almost broke out in German. Montag, Dienstag, you know, that stuff, right? So work with a historical bite. Now, you can work with historical bite your solo. Now, I did say something about a winter count, all right? And so over here, has anyone ever done a winter count? So sometimes, you know, in younger grades, you might do a winter count. This is the Dakota way of doing their calendar in some ways, or documenting important events in their life. And it is a huge honor if you are appointed the person, the designated winter count keeper. So you get to think about the big event and draw it out. Here, they would put on some animal hide, draw it out, and then explain to the village, this was the most important event. Like here, capturing a horse from an enemy village. That's huge. Or, oh, smallpox. Smallpox. I guess maybe one of it could be when I got my smallpox vaccination. Got a nice big old scar right here. Same spot I got my my COVID vaccination. I just made it my historical arm with all my vaccinations. Meteor shower, look at that. Got a meteor shower, all that stuff. Or Indian children going to school, most likely a boarding school. Or if I put down on a winter count, maybe I put graduating from the University of Minnesota. I mean, yesterday was, what was the importance of yesterday? Yeah, so if you're Irish, it's St. Patrick's Day. For me, I'm not Irish, but hey, it's the day I graduated from the University of Minnesota, 1990. It says March 17th. I'm not making it up. So maybe for me, that's my big day. St. Patrick's Day and graduating from the University of Minnesota. Whoa, big stuff. But I'm not Irish. So you think it, so for, if you do that in regards to one of these movements, and I did say it kind of fits more with in the North America or in the United States, but you can do this for Latin America, you can do this for Canada as well. They do have their own versions of winter counts as well. I had found some with the Latin American indigenous people as well. The key here is if you're gonna go that route, you gotta have more description than just smallpox. You gotta explain that. You gotta give some annotation to it. Why is it important to the movement? This is the big thing. How does it change that movement? Okay, and if you, I won't play the video, but there's a little video clip here. It's more geared towards younger students, but still I think does a really good job explaining the winter count. You can watch that. All right, talking a mile a minute. All right. Questions? Need to get clarified on this. Questions? Okay, either it's that straightforward, you're just numb from day one and still in shock and awe, like, oh my God, Miss Items, what are you doing? Yes. You need help with your iPad? I will try to. This is where I'll say I started off at the University of Minnesota as a computer science major, but then I shifted. All right, anyone else? Anyone at home? All right, I'll get you in a moment. So those at home, stay on or you can exit and have a great day.